Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this lovely Friday afternoon, and I have a lot to talk about in this podcast for today because there's a lot of things that I just recently learned, like, for example, in the Olympics, there's a possibility that the 3-seed team has the ability to make it into the tournament. I'm just going to go ahead and explain how that works. But in the first segment, I'm just going to go over the previous games that have been going on right now and just, explain like how the standings will work and things like that. Because now we're in completely... I was very confused with how the standings worked at first, but then I did a little bit of research, and then I figured out exactly how they work, and I'm going to be able to finally tell you guys that. But I will do that in the fourth segment. I'm going to explain how those standings work a little bit better in the fourth segment. But in the second segment, I'm going to talk about the NBA and which players have the best chance to win Rookie of the Year. And then in the third segment, I'm going to talk about the conclusion of Canada against Spain, because the game is going on right now and Canada is up 68-63. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that in the third segment. And then we also have a special fifth segment at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And right now Spain is on a little bit of a scoring run, and the score is 65-68 Canada. So before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please go ahead and to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is GSMCpodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCpodcast.net. And without further ado, let's go right ahead and go over these Olympics. And really, this is a pretty big deal with the Olympics. So remember how I said Australia had the best chances of beating Greece simply because Greece was really in the lower seed of their standings? Well, I was completely wrong. Greece ended up beating the Australian team 77-71, and with this win, that would mean that the Australian team now has the same record as the Greek national team. So this would mean that Greece essentially gets to stay alive for a little bit longer, but they have to wait to see the results of the game that's going on right now, Canada and Spain, to determine who advances. Because I found out that it's not just the top 2 teams that end up advancing. It is the top 3 teams that are in every single group. So number 1 and 2 in Group A, B, and C, they have a guarantee of qualifying. But then the rest of the 2 spots are going to be reserved for the best 3-seeded team. So depending on how this, or the best, teams overall that are left in the group standings. So depending on how the point differential works, and depending on who wins in these games upcoming, will determine who gets in what spot and where each team would be able to place and qualify. So, for example, another game that recently happened, Brazil destroyed Japan in the Group B matchup, and they won 102-84. Because of this win, Brazil has given themselves a chance to actually qualify for the tournament, because they are the 3rd seed by a long shot because of this point differential. And on top of that, Germany and France in the group, they've already qualified. So because they've already qualified, they're just there's no competition really. And these guys were able These guys were able to make quick work of Japan. Brazil was able to make quick work of Japan, and they were able to solidify, and they were able to punch in a spot in this tournament, because it's down to the top 3 teams, the best 3 seed from each group, as opposed to just the top 2 players. It's a little bit confusing. I will admit, I was a little bit confused when I figured this out as well. There is an article that was explaining it, though. A comfortable victory in Lille meant that Brazil finished 3rd in Group B, with a 1-2 record and a -7 point differential. So that's their point differential now. The win, it doesn't immediately grant Brazil a quarterfinal spot, but the result of the following game between Greece and Australia that we talked about helped them solidify their spot in these games. So in their first, this is the first ever Olympic victory for Greece, by the way, in 2024. Like, this is the first time. So, actually, wait, I think this is the first time that they've even qualified in the longest time. So this is their first time in a while that they've actually won a game. And so because they were able to beat Australia, now they also have the same record as Australia. The only difference is really, their point differential, because Australia now has let me just go ahead and bring up the point differentials now. These are the point differentials as they're standing right now. So Australia, they're still up on top because of the point differential, but Spain could clear a way up, right? Depending on how much Spain loses by, they could either do one of two things. If Spain wins, then they will claim that second seed, and then and then Greece is going to be done. Or they could lose, which is what they're doing right now, and their point differential continues to drop. And because their point differential continues to drop, and depending on how much they lose by, which cannot be more than 3, they will fall all the way down to the bottom seed, and therefore allowing Greece a spot in the tournament. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? Are you guys picking up what I'm putting down? Because I felt like I explained that pretty well, but I'll try it again. So Australia, they're second right now. Spain can move up to second if they win. Spain can also move down a little bit more in these standings when they lose. And obviously, they don't want to lose because then they will lose their spot. This is sort of how it works. And also, it should be noted that between the other few teams that are in the running for, the best overall, or that are in the running for the tournament, it's going to be between all of the teams and which teams are the best ones, which ones have the best record, and which ones have the best point differential. So if South Sudan in this next game against Serbia has a lower point differential, then it could be possible that, depending on how the standings go, that South Sudan won't be in the standings. It could be. Actually, wait, no, that's not possible. I lied. Scratch that. It's very confusing, as I said before. These standings and the way that it's structured and just keeping up with all of them is incredibly confusing. But what isn't confusing is raw stats, and if we are going to talk about raw stats, Giannis dominated the day, without a doubt, against the Australian team. Ended with 20 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists. Coincidentally, this was the fewest points that Giannis scored in the entirety of the Olympics, and it's a surprise that they were able to win this one. Now, for some reason, I don't understand why they're doing this, but Greece is ranked higher than Australia in these standings. I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense because Australia has a better point differential than Greece. So I don't understand why the standings are grouped like that on the website, but I digress. I mean, maybe it's a mistake. Maybe the person that's running the website just is incompetent. However you want to put it, it doesn't make any sense to me how and what's crazier is that Greece is the only team that has a lower point differential where it genuinely doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand why they have such a bad why they have a worse point differential but they're ranked higher. It doesn't make any sense. I'm incredibly confused by that, and I have no idea what's going into the placements and what's going into the rankings, but for some reason Greece, despite that minus point differential over Australia, is still ranked higher than Australia. It doesn't make any sense. It genuinely doesn't. Now, maybe it's because they ended up winning in the end, like they ended up beating Australia, but I don't see how that could warrant them moving all the way up to the second spot. I just don't understand. Like, that's according to FIBA.basketball, so like, the official website for FIBA basketball. I don't know if they messed that up or if that's just how it works for some reason. I have no idea why that's the way that it is. But yeah, like it's just confusing. Again, this entire thing is just a little bit disorganized in my opinion and very, very, very confusing. So that's why, in the fourth segment it's going to be a little bit difficult determining just how these standings are, like just how these standings work and how, this team, I guess you could say this tournament actually functions. Like, it's very confusing. But I digress. Now, a little bit of an update on the Canada and Spanish game. Canada is up by 80 right now, and Spain is... Actually, no, they're not. Whoa. They're up 80-73. That's what I wanted to say. Excuse me. So that means they're up by 7 points. So if this plays out, like, if they lose by 7, then Spain is most likely going to get eliminated from the Group A standings, because their plus-minus would be way below Greece's point differential right now. And that's something that, they absolutely cannot afford. So, but if they win, however, then they would be able to move up into the second spot of the standings, because they would be 2-2 compared to... Actually, wait, no. They would be 2-1 compared to the rest of the teams that are 1-2 in the Group A standings. And, that's just, food for thought. Now, for Brazil and going against Japan, like, the reason why they were able to actually qualify is because now they have, amongst all of the people in the third seed right now, they have the best potential to end up getting the best point differential. So if that makes sense. So essentially, their point differential is -7 right now. Greece, if the way that things play out, they turn out to still remain in the third spot, they would have a point differential of -8, which is less than Brazil's just by 1. Like, literally less than Brazil's by just 1. And for Group C, the South Sudan has a point differential of -6. Now, depending on how the game goes between Serbia and South Sudan is going to depend on... It will influence who gets the third spot, if that makes any sense to you guys. But these are the game. This is why this game was sort of like... Why it wasn't important before, but now it's important, because Brazil actually, with the results of the Australia and Greece game, they were actually, fighting for a spot. Well, they did it in vain, I should say, because, Brazil kind of wiped the floor with Japan, but the Brazil game happened before the Australia against Greece game, so they were just fighting for their country at that point, and they were competing for their country at that point, and the fact that they actually were able to, win in the end, and this gave them a good chance of qualifying, is impressive. Like, I think that's just, like, it's a little bit lucky. You could argue that it's luck, but at the same time, it's just very, very impressive to think about. Because, like, if I was them, like, if I was their coach, I would have, actually, you know what? I would have thought that the game was rather meaningless, because I would have assumed that Australia was going to beat Greece. But it goes to show you that, like, anything can happen in sports, and that anything can happen in these games. So that's really, like, all that I wanted to talk about, because, like, while this game the game wasn't really that competitive. Like, Brazil against Japan, it wasn't even close. It was never close. From the jump, it wasn't close. To the final quarter, it wasn't close. And Japan, along with Puerto Rico, are arguably the two weakest teams in the entirety of the of the Olympics, like of the Olympic Games. Also, should be noted, Leo Mendil, you remember the guy that was ranked number 1 in the MVP poll that I was talking about, wasn't even the team's leading scorer. It was someone named Bruno Caboclo, who ended up getting 33 points in the game against Japan. Like, he was lighting them up. And again, like, for the Australian side, there wasn't really many, I guess you could say, outstanding players that, stood out in this matchup. And I mean, like, at least on the Australian side, obviously, with the Greece side, you had Giannis Antetokounmpo, but it was just one of those games where Australia just couldn't really hit a shot from 3. They were very piss poor shooting from 3 compared to, I mean, the Greece team wasn't that much better at shooting from 3, but because they had Giannis and because they were able to shoot a lot better from the field, like from the field as a whole, it propelled them to eventually win the game in the end. Like, this was just a bit of an unfortunate game for if you're Australia, because it's like you kind of needed this win, otherwise, because now your fate sort of hinges on not only this game that's going on right now. By the way, it's 82-79 with 53 seconds left, and Spain is at the free throw line. So very, very critical game going on right now. But Australia, they had the chance to qualify and do it themselves, but now they have to rely on other teams and other players, which is something that you really don't like. And Spain just missed a free throw, and now Canada has the ball up by 2 with 46 seconds left. So I'll be right back after this short break as I go over who has the best chances of winning Rookie of the Year, and I'll let you know that RJ Barrett just hit a 3-pointer to increase the lead to 85-80. So it's getting really, really close in this final game, and it's not looking good for Spain, but I'll go ahead and I'll give an update exactly right after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned for the next segment where I talk about the best chances of winning Rookie of the Year. Stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, I'm going to talk about something a little bit easier to follow and a little bit easier to understand. Rookie of the Year polls and who has arguably, the best chances of winning Rookie of the Year. Now, before I begin, and before I go ahead and, explaining this segment and, why I'm doing this segment, I would like to remind everybody to please go ahead and to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is GSMCpodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCpodcast.net. And without further ado, let's go ahead and go into this next segment. Also, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander appeared to got fouled on a shot attempt. Score is 85-82 right now. And now it's all down to him to hit these free throws to push this lead out a little bit farther. Now, aside from that, why am I doing this segment? Well, for one, it's a lot easier for you guys to follow as opposed to, the Olympics, where even I'm a little bit confused on how these standings work. I mean, the website and, how should I say? The rules say that point differential is going to be the tiebreaker, but on the website, for some reason, Giannis's team, Greece, is ranked higher than Australia, despite the fact that their point differential isn't the same. So, and also Shai Gilgeous just missed a free throw. And, it's kind of confusing. So, just to make it not so confusing, and Spain just missed a 3, and now they're fighting for a rebound. Another 3 from Spain, and they hit. So the score is now a point differential by 1. So Spain could still win this. Like, theoretically, they could still win this. But, aside from that, and that is a crazy clutch shot. I'll talk a little bit about that in the fourth segment when I talk about, or actually no, in the third segment when I talk about the game. But, depending on whether or not this game goes into overtime, I might push that back a little bit farther. But anyways, back to Rookie of the Year. I keep getting sidetracked. There's so much stuff going on. But Rookie of the Year, like, the polls and the standings, they're way easier to follow. And, it's much easier to talk about other people's opinions as opposed to, talking about something like this that is active and live and constantly changing, especially with these games going on. So that's sort of like, it's something like for me, so that way I could ease up a little bit and have, a genuine flow and a genuine, something genuine to talk about, I guess you could say. Because, like I say several times, everything that I say about these Olympics is always constantly changing. Because, these games, they're happening live as I'm doing this, these shows and I'm doing these segments. So everything that I say could end up being null and void later in the future. But aside from that, Rookie of the Years and the polls, they can't be null and void. So that's why I'm going to talk about this. So this draft class, it's one of the weakest draft classes in recent history. There aren't that many players that, stand out to a lot of, insiders, scouts, coaches. Nobody is like, ooh, I'm super excited that he's on my team, right? Like, no one's like that now. The only player from this draft class that has garnered any kind of attention is Bronny. Like, the only one. And the only reason why he's getting this much attention is literally because of his father. Everyone else in the draft class, like the number 1 and the number 2 pick, I feel like this is probably like the least talked about number 1 pick, right next to Paolo Banchero. Like, I don't think anyone has been talking about this kid. And I don't think anyone has been talking about Alexander Star either, aside from the fact that he is just completely incompetent and he shot worse than Bronny in the Summer League. That is the only time that people have talked about him. And, it's a bit underwhelming, this rookie class, especially, considering how we just came off of Victor Wembanyama and, him being drafted, and this, ridiculous, well, not really a ridiculous rookie class, but the class is going to be remembered for drafting Victor Wembanyama and nothing more. So coming over to this draft, where it's only going to be remembered for drafting LeBron's son, who arguably isn't really that good now, at least, right now, it's not looking good for this draft class. So, excuse me. So this voting, it's done by anonymous NBA insiders, I believe. So it could be it's not coaches, that I know. It's a list of some of these insiders. They're anonymous, obviously. So I can't really tell you exactly who voted on these lists, but they know their stuff, I guess you could say. And it's no surprise that the only thing to judge these games off of are Summer League games. And I say this every single time. We don't have to overreact for these Summer League games. So this is just, before the season even starts, could be completely wrong in the future, the way that this poll works. Could end up, flipping all the way over its head. The number 1 overall pick might end up playing like a number 1 overall pick. We have no idea. So, first on this list, I'm actually getting into this list after monologuing forever, is, well, if it'll pop up, there we go. Obviously, Reed Shepherd, probably going to be everyone's favorite to win Rookie of the Year. He got 7 votes from all of these anonymous people, and oh, that was close. But anyways, aside from that, the Rookie of the Year, by the way, Spain, they ended up losing by 3 points. So I'm definitely going to talk about that and the standings in the third segment. But Reed Shepherd, excuse me, 7 votes, ended up getting majority of the votes by a landslide. And the second player on this list is probably going to surprise a lot of you, but it's Zach Edey. He ended up getting 4 votes on this list, which is, it's very, very, it just goes to show you how bad this draft class actually is. Because everyone, like all over the media and everyone and the internet, they all think that Zach Edey is just another form of Boban. Like, the really tall 7'3" Boban that used to play for the Mavericks and used to play for the for the Rockets as well. Okay, so right now I'm looking at the brackets. Canada and Australia, they advance given the results. They have qualified for the quarterfinal given the results of the Spaniard game, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that in the later segment. But Zach Edey being second on this list with 4 votes just goes to show you just how bad this draft class really is, because not many people think highly of this center. They really don't. Next player on this list is Stefan Castle. Now, I don't think he's going to win Rookie of the Year simply because I don't think he's going to get starter minutes. And because you're not going to get starter minutes, that's just, it's going to hurt your chances of winning Rookie of the Year. He did get 3 votes, however, so maybe he will get starter minutes, but I highly doubt that. With Chris Paul being on the roster now, I highly doubt that. But then again, Chris Paul did come off the bench with Golden State, so maybe that is going to be his role for the team. No idea. We have to see that in the future. Next is Stefan Castle's former teammate, Donovan Clingan, arguably one of the most pleasant surprises in this draft. He is a defensive, he's ridiculous in the paint, and he's super tall, and, he's really likable. I mean, I watched a lot of UConn games. He was that guy on UConn. He was a different breed. Next is the number 1 overall pick, Zachary Wisacher. And obviously, being the number 1 overall pick and only getting 1 vote from these insiders is kind of disappointing. And not kind of, it's very disappointing, honestly. Because, when you're the number 1 overall pick, you arguably have the best odds to win Rookie of the Year. It doesn't always happen, but 9 times out of 10 it'll happen. And, well, I shouldn't say 9 times out of 10. More like 6 times out of 10. How about that? Because, that's usually the best player in the draft. Usually, not all the time. So, the fact that he's got the only 1 vote as the number 1 pick, I'm surprised how he even got 1 vote just based off of how he played in the Summer League. But, aside from that, next on the list is Ron Holland II. He ended up getting 1 vote as well. And, this draft class is just so bad that it's anybody can get picked. And he's for the Pistons, so I don't think that he is going to win Rookie of the Year. Unless he just, completely dominates and just takes Cade Cunningham's place on the team. I doubt it. Next is Dalton Knecht. Now, he also ended up getting 1 vote. I keep scratching my eye. I apologize for that. But he ended up getting 1 vote for this poll. And people called him a sleeper pick, and people thought that he was a great steal coming into the draft. So I'm kind of very surprised that he didn't get more votes on this list. And for being considered the steal of the entire draft class, why didn't he get any votes? It's very confusing to me. Then finally, the last player on this list, and the last player with only 1 vote, Tristan da Silva. And obviously, the fact that he ended up getting at least 1 vote is saying something, but I don't think he's going to win Rookie of the Year. In fact, I'm not entirely sure who's going to win Rookie of the Year on this list. I think Reed Shepherd definitely has the best chances, but I also think Dalton Knecht could also make a stand and make a name for himself when he does, if he does win this. He has a good chance of winning it as well. Now, maybe he's not going to just because he's not going to get starter minutes, but this draft class is like really, really bad that he possibly could. So with this out of the way, I'm going to go right ahead and just go over the Canada versus Spanish game because it was really close, and I'm just going to go ahead and explain, the importance of it to the best that I can right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I apologize for the little bit of a delay, but I kind of had to, because not only was I getting some really bad allergies in this eye that you could see that I'm scratching 24/7, but also because I just needed to sort of update my slides, update them with the score, and also update them with the point differential, because those all just completely changed from what I said before. And now we also have to wait for the next game that's going to come up, because the next game isn't going to happen until like 3 o'clock, which is France and Germany, which actually isn't really that big of a game, honestly. Like, those two teams, they've already qualified, so right now they're just fighting to see who is the best. And I'm personally really excited to see Victor. Like, I'm very, very excited to see Victor play against this German team. And I'm also very curious to see which team is going to come out on top. So, aside from that, let's talk about the Spain versus Canada game. So, Spain ended up losing, but they didn't lose by that much. In fact, if you remember in the previous segment that I said, they had to, if they wanted to even have a chance, they were just not allowed to lose by more than 3. And guess what? They ended up losing by just 3. So that would mean that they have the exact same point differential as Greece. And they would also have the exact same record as Greece. Now, this point differential is just, it's really not in their favor, because now that they have the same point differential as Greece, it's just going to be, way easier for the South Sudan team and for the Brazilian team to qualify. Like, as of right now, Brazil has already qualified for their spot just because of the outcome of this game. Because their point differential, Brazil's point differential is -7. Now, here is the sort of, the updated point differential for Group A and their standings. So, you see Spain and Greece, they have the exact same point differential. And let me just go ahead. Brazil's point differential, remember, it was -25 last time we checked. Well, the last time they played. But with this game against Japan and them absolutely destroying Japan by over 20 points, they were able to fix their point differential and make it -7. So they have a better point differential than Spain and Canada right now. And so that would mean that in the next, matchups, like South Sudan and the Serbian team, South Sudan has to win. And if they win, I believe that would mean that they get to qualify for the next round of the Olympics. But if they lose, they have to make sure, actually, you know what, now that I think about it, they cannot afford to lose. Like, they genuinely cannot afford to lose. Unless it's by 1 point, they cannot afford to lose. Because if they lose, then that would be over for them. And, this is reserved for the two best teams it's only reserved for a couple of third-seeded teams. Like, not every third seed is going to make it through. So, let's just say, for argument's sake, South Sudan, they make it through off of a loss. They lose by 1 point. That would mean, I believe that would mean, Serbia would advance because they win. France and Germany, they've already advanced, so they would advance as well. Canada and Australia, they would advance too, because they ended up being the top two seeds. And then all that's left is Spain and Greece, which have the same point differential, and aside from Japan and Puerto Rico, who are done. Like, they're just completely done. There's nothing that they can do to save them. And especially Japan. Like, Japan is over with. So, again, it's very, very confusing to keep up with all of this. It's very, very, very confusing. Because all of this, happens, it could happen, anything could happen. And it all happens like this, and if you're just not quick enough, you're just not going to keep up. And you'll be left in the dust with this score and with the way that the standings work. But the game was, it seemed like Canada was trying to pull away from it in a lot of moments of this game. But Canada just wasn't, Spain refused to go down. They absolutely refused to go down. And, I'm just going to go ahead and look at the box scores and see who were the best players for each of the two teams. And I'm sorry that I don't have, a graphic fixed up and ready for that because, the game literally just ended. So the box score of this game is looking a little bit like this. So the best player for the Canadians was arguably RJ Barrett, because RJ Barrett hit an extremely clutch three-pointer that, was able to seal the game for Canada. And you could also make the argument that Shai played pretty well as well and was the player of the game. He ended with 20 points, 5 for 11 from the field. Now, Andrew Nembhard was a surprise performance coming in for Canada. Ended up going 8 for 10 from the field and was able to go 2 for 3 from 3. Now, for Spain didn't really have that many great players. The only player that really stood out was Dario Brizuela. And aside from that, everyone else kind of shot rather poorly. And they had several players on the team not hit a single shot. Rudy Fernandez went 0 for 5. And let's see, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. Alberto Diaz also went 0 for 1. And Lorenzo Brown ended up going 2 for 9 from the field. So this just did not help the Spanish team. And this is also really unfortunate because if they would have won this game, they would have without a doubt cemented themselves in a spot in this tournament. But because they ended up losing, now they're gonna have to prey on other teams to, be able to propel them into that playoff race and that qualification race, I guess you could say. It's weird calling it a qualification race. So these are just the results of this game. Now, with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and go into the next break, and I'm just going to sort of try my best to explain the standings and how they work. I'm going to read a couple of articles with you guys as well, just so, maybe we can get a better understanding of how these rankings work. I'm also going to update the point differentials and the placements of all of these teams right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, I'm going to go ahead and explain the standings, and I'm going to go ahead and explain, how these teams were able to qualify, this, that, and the other. I'm going to read a couple of articles as well, just so maybe you guys will get a better understanding from the articles than just how I speak. So I'm just going to do a little bit of both. And so, obviously, with the Greece and the Brazil game concluding, along with the Spanish game, there is a possibility for Greece to advance to the quarterfinals, but Serbia has to beat South Sudan by 2 or more points on Saturday. That is one way that Greece could advance to the quarterfinals. Now, I'm not entirely sure what that's going to mean for Spain, who has the exact same point differential and the exact same record as Greece going into this, but we'll go ahead and we'll see how that plays out a little bit in the future. But that's sort of the reason why Greece was able to stay alive. Now, according to this article, Greece edged Australia 77-71 in Group A to remain in contention at the Olympic men's basketball competition on Friday, as Brazil beat Japan 102-84 to secure third place in Group B in their bid to reach the quarterfinals in the final round of games. So, the victory keeps Greece in contention for a place in the quarterfinals, with the Australians also still in the mix, though both sides must wait for the results of the game between Canada, which already happened, who have qualified, and Spain. At the end of the group phase, the top 8 teams from the combined ranking qualify for the quarterfinals. Brazil's win over Japan secured third place in Group B, while Germany and France, who meet later on Friday, have already booked places in the last 8. The hero for the Verde Amarela was forward Bruno Caboclo, who scored an impressive 33 points and made 17 rebounds. So, he was the standout player for Brazil. Now, it's the biggest stage of basketball. Now, every athlete wants to be here at least one time. We were able to accomplish that. That's what, the Brazilian player had to say. So, it would seem as if the placements go to the top 8 teams, period. So it's not so much as who stands where in the group standings, but rather how they rank overall in the group standings. So with that in mind, let me just go ahead and pull up the records and the plus minuses real quick. Give me a second. Or the point differentials. I keep calling them plus minuses. I apologize for that. But essentially, wrong slide. There we go. That works. And so, Canada, right now, we're just going off of the top 8 teams right now. So, number 1 would actually be the United States, because they have the best point differential, and they arguably are going to end up finishing with the best record. There's no question about it, okay? Now, next would be Germany, who has the best record for the Group B standings and the best point differential, especially going into the rest of these games. Now, I know Japan and Brazil, they're not in the right order, but just bear with me on that. I couldn't mix where the two ended up, placing, so I apologize for that. as well as I'm going to, again, like I said before, I'm going to get a different graphic up there. For those of you guys on the audio side, you guys can't see, so don't worry about that. But for those of you guys on the YouTube side, I'm going to get a much better graphic that will, display the placements after everything is concluded. All right? So just bear with me on this one. And then the next team that would be ranked, third would be Canada, given how the point differential works and their record since they ended up finishing flawless, right? So then the team that would be second on this list is, actually no, not second, fourth on this list would be France, because they have a point differential of 16. And then right after that, so we're at fifth, I believe, would be Serbia, which would have, because they have a point differential of 15, which will be, exactly, which is just one less than France. So we're at 5. That means there's only 3 other teams left that would be able to qualify. Only 3 other teams left. Actually, wait, is my math? Yeah, my math is right. So we have 5 teams. That would mean only 3 of them, can qualify. So we already know that Brazil qualified because of the matchup against Japan. And they seem to have already, taken a qualification spot, at least according to their website, right? Now, depending on how it goes, I believe, again, this is the fact that it's not finalized yet. So we're just doing right now. So don't take my word for this. This could all change immediately, especially after the South Sudan and Serbia game. So with this game, well, with the recent games that we've just experienced, it would seem as if, the 6th team would probably be, let me just go ahead and check just to make sure. It would be, let me see. Yeah, it would be Australia, because Australia has a 1-2 record, but they have the best point differential compared to everyone else. So that would mean that we have 6 teams, I believe, or 7 teams. Did I do my math right? I keep fumbling, I'm sorry, but you have the United States, Germany, Canada, so we'll just say all the top 2 teams, we have 6. So then Brazil would be 7th. Okay, there we go, now I'm back on track. And finally we're left with South Sudan, because South Sudan has between Australia and between Brazil and between Spain and Greece, they have the better point differential, and they could potentially, now this is subject to change, but we're talking about right now. But since it is subject to change, if they lose, they just have to hope that they don't lose by anything more than 1 point, because if they lose by more than 1, then they're out. If they lose by more than 2, actually, they're basically out, because Spain and Greece, they already have a -8 point differential, the exact same record. So that is really that is really the most confusing part. And when I'm looking at the standings and how they're set up, Greece is ahead of the Spanish team in the standings. I have no idea whether or not that's going to change, but this is just how the standings look right now as they are. So again, these are all just completely subject to change. And they all have the exact same amount of points because their record is exactly the same. Canada has 6, Australia has 4, Greece also has 4, and Spain also has 4. Now, for the other side, for Germany, France, Japan, and Brazil, Germany and France, they both have 4, but that's only because they haven't played yet. So one of those teams is going to end up getting 6, and then the other team is going to end up getting 5 points. And then Brazil also has 4 points, and they immediately advance because they have, the better point differential than a majority of these teams, and they're going to advance. That's going to happen. It's confirmed that they're going to advance. And as of right now, the United States, they're definitely going to qualify. There's no question about it. They're going to qualify. It's going to happen. And what's really affecting these standings is just the South Sudan game. We just have to wait and see how much either South Sudan wins by or how much Serbia wins by. Because I haven't even thought about talking about, what would happen if Serbia ends up losing. Like, I haven't even begun to talk about that. So, if Serbia loses, then they fall down to 1-2. But, depending on how much they lose by, falling down to 1-2 might not really matter. Because, like, if they lose by, let me think. If they lose by around, I want to say, anything around 15 points or less, if they lose by any of those, like 15 or less, then that would mean they are still in the positive, section for point differential, right? And that is what is used for tiebreakers. So South Sudan, they would move up to 2-1, being one of, the few teams that are actually 2-1. And once they move up to 2-1, it would be down to the 1-2, like they would already qualify when they would be, if they go 2-1. They would already qualify since there are only a couple of teams that are either flawless or 2-1. So for example, Canada is flawless. Now, Germany or France, it's going to be one or the two. So one of those teams are going to be positive, are going to be flawless, and then the other team is going to be, just one, is going to have just one loss. So that means that there's only one other team that has one loss, and then going into this matchup later, there's going to be only one other team that has one loss. It felt like I had to sneeze for a second. I apologize for that. But again, it's very difficult to keep up with all of these standings because of just how much they change. So if none of this helped you guys out, I apologize. It's probably better for you to wait until, the end result and until everyone else until the Olympics and the people that are in charge of organizing this whole thing finish their math and do all that, and do all the qualification stuff. But if this doesn't help you sort of get a better understanding of how this works, then I can't really say anything more, but I will try to, dumb it down in this sentence coming up right now. So, it's really the top 8 teams, period. So, they're going to use point differential for tiebreakers. But what's going to be troublesome is Greece and Spain, because they both have the exact same record along with the exact same point differential. So, I have no idea if they're going to play a game to sort of settle it, or if they're going to play. I have no idea what they're going to do, no idea how it's going to be handled. And that would actually be, that would be pretty cool, don't you think? Like, imagine if they were to, imagine if the teams, they were able to, battle each other, like they would able to go up against each other and settle this tiebreaker. Because the records are exactly the same. The only thing that isn't exactly the same is, their overall stats. So, and their whatever their AGT is, whatever their FA is, and whatever their AA is, those numbers are completely different. And I've never seen those numbers before. I'm not even going to lie to you. So, aside from that, we're out of time for this 4th segment. I hope that, does a pretty good job in explaining just how these Olympics work. Again, it's going to be the top 8 teams that are in all of the groups right now. So the top 10 teams, they're going to. It's actually, I thought it was a little bit like soccer, but it's nothing like that. How in soccer you have the top 2 teams in each group. They advance. It's clear cut that they advance. But then again, that tournament is a little bit bigger, so they have a lot more countries in there by default. But it's going to be reserved for the top 8 teams throughout the entirety of the group standings. So the only teams that have been confirmed to qualify for the quarterfinal spot is Canada, France, Germany, and Brazil, and USA. So with that would mean that there are 5 spots that are already taken, meaning that there are only 3 other spots for 3 other teams to go ahead and take the final spot, at least, according to how the standings are right now. So The Serbia against South Sudan game is going to be the determining factor on who gets picked to go into the next round and who doesn't get picked to go into the next round. So just be sure to stay tuned for that, just in case, if you guys want to watch anything more competitive. Because not only should this, determine who gets in from the other groups, but it should also determine who gets in from the Group C standings. So if Serbia wins, they punch their ticket to get it into the quarterfinal. If South Sudan wins, they also punch their ticket to get into the quarterfinal, instead of just, being reliant on the point differential to put themselves in that category. Serbia, they can afford to really lose, but they could afford to lose by no greater than 15 points, because if they lose by that much, then they would still be in the running because of their point differential being so much higher than the rest of the teams that aren't qualified. Like, the teams that aren't qualified, Australia, Greece, and Spain, they all have a negative point differential. Brazil, a team that already qualified, already has a -7 point differential. So as long as they're able to get a better point differential than Brazil, they qualify. Like, that's how it'll go. So it's really up to them. Like, would Serbia lose, but lose purposely not by much, just so, South Sudan can actually qualify? Or are they going to kick them to the curb and see which team in the Group A's standings is going to end up making it all the way, or making it to the quarterfinal? So I hope that does a pretty good job in explaining. Now, in the final segment, I'm going to go ahead and give my predictions for these games coming up, what's going to happen, and what I see going on into the future right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this final segment, I'm just going to give my predictions of what's going to happen, or what I think is going to happen, going into these final few games before the qualifying round ends up being played. Now, the quarterfinals is set to start on Tuesday, August 6th, and the final day of actual, just regular games, I guess you could say, is going to happen on Saturday. However, there is still one more game that's going to go down, and that's more like, I guess you could say, a fun game, because these two teams, France and Germany, they're going to end up playing against each other. They've already qualified, and there's really there's no need to be playing that game, but, we all like basketball, so we all really, really want to watch that game. And I think France, I believe they don't have as much NBA talent as the German team has, at least, like, if I remember correctly. Let me just go ahead and check. The German team, they have, actually, wait a minute, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, the France team has more players in the NBA currently than the German team. So that's my bad for that misconception and that mistake. And they also have more players with NBA experience than they do the German team. Now, the German team, they have several players that have never played in the NBA. Meanwhile, the France team, they have Victor Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert, two top NBA players in the league in their respective categories, and the top two players in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. And whether you think Rudy Gobert should have won it or whether you think Victor should have won it or not, it doesn't matter. Having both of these two on the same team it's pretty broken, especially since Victor is so much taller than a lot of these other guards and these other forwards and basically every other center. Like, he's just better than a lot of them. And I feel like I'm pretty sure that France should make this a win. Like, they should be able to win. But given how they almost lost to Japan, that is, like, it's really, like, rubbing me the wrong way. Like, I don't want to put my money on them immediately because, again, I'm not entirely sure if they're going to, perform as well as I think that they should. Because, like, that performance against Japan was very, very bad. Like, it shouldn't have been anywhere near that close. It should not have been that close. And the fact that they took them an overtime quarter just to be able to beat them is a bit concerning. However, they did answer the call when they desperately needed it, and I always like to put my money on teams that can deliver in high-pressure situations. And, like, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Like, that's really what I like to see that with teams. And the fact that they were able to hit an incredibly clutch 3-point and one to tie the game, like, it's you can't get any more clutch than that. Granted, may have been bailed out because of the ref calling the foul, but aside from that, I don't think that was a bailout. There's a lot of sports going on in the Olympics, by the way. There's track and field, there's soccer, there's fencing. Goodness me. But anyway, aside from that, that's really, like, sort of what I expect to happen, and I would put my money on France because the French team, they deliver in these high leverage games. Let me just go ahead and quickly adjust the light on this. There we go. They deliver in these high leverage games, and, like, Germany, they've seemed to blow out, like, almost every single time. Like, they've blown out every single team that they've gone up against, but then again, they've also gone up against the lowest ranking teams in their entire bracket, in their entire group. So playing against the French team, it's going to be a little bit more competitive than the rest of these teams. So maybe the fact that they haven't seen adversity yet is going to, hinder them a little bit. But that's just me. Now, next on this also, like, this game is one of the very few games that has any sort of implications on quarterfinals because they both qualified. Doesn't matter what happens. Now, the next game, however, is going to be a little bit more competitive. United States against Puerto Rico. Psych. But no, seriously, I think the United States is going to absolutely mop the floor with Puerto Rico. Like, they're just going to... That's the sound of a sweep. Like, they're just going to destroy them. The end. Kaput. Done. Next question. So, the actual game that, that really matters and that is going to affect a lot of teams is going to be the Serbian game against South Sudan. Depending on how this game ends could really shape-shift the way that the quarterfinals is going to go. There are a multitude of different things that could end up happening based off of the results of this game. Like, there is a possibility of what happens if Serbia wins. There's a possibility of what happens if South Sudan wins. There's also a possibility of what happens if Serbia wins by this much, if Serbia loses by this much, if South Sudan wins by this much, if South Sudan loses by this much. So many stuff. It's so complicated. Like, it is very complicated, but I'm going to try to, explain it a little bit better one more time. Like, I've spent so many times explaining this because, like, it is very confusing. It's very confusing. So, depending on how much South Sudan wins by, well, actually, no, we'll go by South Sudan losing because I firmly believe that South Sudan is going to end up losing this game. So, if South Sudan ends up losing, okay? This is a high possibility. This could very well happen. Now, if they lose, they have to make sure that they lose by, at the very least, 2 points or At the very least, 1 point. If they lose to Serbia by 1 point, then that would mean that their point differential would be -7, and their record would be exactly the same as Brazil, Australia, Spain, and Greece. But because they would still have that point differential to back them up, they would qualify. Because Australia would qualify just based off of point differential, and Brazil has already qualified, so there's really only room for about 2 more teams left if my math is correct. So you have Canada that's going to qualify, Germany that's going to qualify, United States that's going to qualify, Serbia that's going to qualify, France that's going to qualify. So that is 5 teams. And then you also had Brazil that qualifies, so that's 6. So that leaves you with 2 other teams left to possibly qualify in these games. And if South Sudan only loses by 2, then Australia and South Sudan would qualify. Right? Makes enough sense. Now, if Serbia ends up losing, then that's a whole different ball game if Serbia ends up losing. Because then South Sudan, they would be 2-1, and then Serbia would be 1-2, which would mean that Serbia has the same record as Australia, Spain, Greece, and Brazil. Now, depending on whether or not Serbia loses by more than 15 points, if they just lose, then they would still qualify, because the fact that they have the same record as Australia, Brazil, Spain, and Greece is going to get canceled out because of their extremely high point differential. Their point differential is plus 15, meaning that if they would lose by anything less than 15 points, that wouldn't matter, because Australia has a -4, Spain and Greece have a -8, and Brazil have a -7. So that point differential for Serbia is going to be what propels them to make it into the next round, because they have such a high point differential. Right? Now, if they lose by more than 15 points, like let's say they lose by, let's do some quick math here. Let's say they lose by 22 points or something like that. Then their point differential would be in the negatives, which would alter, which teams would end up in which spot. Like, that is really like the big what if scenario. Like, what if South Sudan just comes out and just immediately destroys the Serbian team? That is a very, very big what if. Very big what if. Which is, why I don't think that Serbia is going to end up losing, let alone by so many points. Which is why I think that Serbia is going to end up qualifying regardless of whether or not they win or lose. But that is just the way that I think, and that is how I think that. Those are just my predictions. Let me know in the comments what you guys think is going to happen. But aside from that, that is all that I have for you today on this segment. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, please remember to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. It's gsmcpodcast.net. Really ups the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. That is all that I have for you today on the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Nelson, and as always, take care and have a great weekend. I'll see you all on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.